Welcome to Securing America with me, Frank Gaffney, a program that's a kind of owner's manual for protecting the country we love against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to God's glory and that of His kingdom. We are in the midst of challenges to our country and to its security across the broadest imaginable front, truly from enemies domestic and foreign. A woman that I've had the privilege of getting to know and work with now for, well, I don't know, 15, 20 years, I think, who I believe really represents the acme of knowledge, insight, and clarity about all of these problems, really, but most especially the portfolio that she has made her prime focus of effort, not least after her Aliyah to Israel, her departure from the United States, where she was born and raised, to the state of Israel, where she is now one of, I think, the preeminent voices on the right about, well, Israel's security, but also that of the free world more generally, and of course the United States as well. Her name is Caroline Glick. She is the author of a number of important books, countless columns and articles, and now the host of the Caroline Glick Mideast News Hour, which is really required viewing if you want to understand what is happening there and what it means for us. That and, of course, watching her on this program from time to time, which we're always pleased to feature her for. She is also, and I couldn't be more pleased about this, a senior fellow of our Center for Security Policy and a great friend as well. Caroline Glick, welcome to the program. It's good to have you with us, ma'am.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Frank. Thanks for having me.
The pleasure is truly mine, and I thank you for giving generously of your time to talk about the whole host of issues that are now in prospect, or in some cases, actually upon us. And Carolyn, I know that as we speak, the Jerusalem prayer breakfast is taking place in your general neighborhood. Our friend and colleague Michelle Bachman is the co-chair of that. We're going to hope to catch up with her shortly about it as well, but I'd like to get your sense at the moment of the state of the peace of Jerusalem and the various challenges that are being posed to it, both by sort of the locals, if you will, and those that somewhat further remove, and the contribution being made to all of that by the Biden administration.
It's a big question, so maybe we can divide it into four different blocks.
Absolutely.
One is the Arabs and the Muslim activists on the Temple Mount, who are being sponsored by the PLO and Hamas. Other one is the Israeli left and their desire to appease the Islamists and the terrorists who are trying to destabilize the city. Another one is the European Union, which is underwriting a plan to the tune of $1 billion to undermine Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem, including in the Temple Mount and in large swaths of the city and its environs, and transform them into a Yudin Rhine area that is controlled by the Palestinian Arabs. And finally, is the Biden administration, which is facilitating the chaos through its support for the Palestinians in their territorial claims to Israel's capital against the state of Israel and against the stated policies of the United States of America to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of the state of Israel. So, just very briefly, for the past several months, and really for over the past year, it began a year ago, and it's had rises and falls in the intervening months. The Temple Mount, which is the sacredest site, the most sacred site, some would argue the only sacred site to Jerusalem, the place where both of the temples stood, the place where Abraham sacrificed Isaac, where Jacob had his dream of the
Almost
ladder going up
sacrificed
and down.
Isaac.
Right, where he intended to sacrifice his son Isaac
Right.
at God's command, and on to the temples of Jerusalem. Um, is also the site of Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's obviously also a sacred site to Christianity, to Christians, and it's also the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which the Palestinian Arabs and their supporters claim is the third most holy spot to Islam. Many Islamic scholars would argue that this is not the case, but be that as it may, there one of the main um, one of the main rallying calls of terrorism against Israel has been Al-Aqsa Mosque and the repeated claim by Yasser Arafat, by Osama bin Laden, by Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah and Iran's leaders, and so on and so forth throughout the world of Islamic Jihad, that Al-Aqsa is endangered, that Jews are defiling the Islamic holy site, so called, with their dirty feet, and that they're planning on blowing up the mosques. None of this, of course, is true, particularly, of course, the dirty feet and defiling of Judaism's most sacred site. But they use this rallying call as a means to incite and gin up violence against Jews, both at the Temple Mount, at the Wailing Wall, the remaining wall, the retaining wall of the Temple of Solomon that is beneath the Temple Mount Plaza, at police who try to maintain order on the Temple Mount, and then in wider and wider circles against Jews in Jerusalem, in the Old City, throughout the city, and throughout Israel, and to incite a riot and a rebellion of Israeli Arabs against the state of Israel. And so that's been going on for a number of weeks. We've seen rising levels of violence, or we saw ahead of Israel's Independence Day. We have the festival of Shavuot, which is coming up on Saturday night and Sunday, which is the holiday that commemorates the acceptance of the Torah by the Jews at Mount Sinai from God. And so it's a very big holiday. It's also a holiday where Jews, one of the three annual pilgrimages to Jerusalem to celebrate the harvests in the land of Israel. So it's a very big day in Jerusalem. So I don't know what the anticipation is of violence going on, but we have had a lot of attacks by Islamic jihadists and the crowds and the mobs that they've incited
Yeah.
in Jerusalem and throughout Israel.
Let me just
These
ask,
people,
Carolyn, because I think this is, a very grim problem all by itself, and we'll get to several of the other ones that you've mentioned. But this issue of incitement is a point
Mhm,
that I think is generally not really appreciated in this country as it should be. Just a further word about what form that takes and how impactful it is when these various leaders, and you can throw in the Turks, I guess, as well, among others
mhm.
that are fostering it from outside as well
Right.
as inside the Holy Land.
Yeah, I think that Turkish President Recep Erdogan is one of the primary fulminators of the violence. He both through his finance of radical NGOs and operations on the Temple Mount, and also through his own incitement. So it's interesting. It is an unfamiliar concept for Americans, and rightly so, because it seems to go against freedom of speech. Oliver Wendell Holmes famously said that every idea is an incitement, but he also understood the difference between inciting people with ideas and ideals and concepts and calling out fire in a crowded theater and inducing a stampede.
Right.
And when we talk about incitement, we're talking about the latter example. Because if you take a mobilized society like the Palestinian Arabs that are mobilized, their nationalism itself is one not based on any positive group identity, but on the negation of the Jewish national identity and the Jewish national home, the state of Israel,
I want you
and
to hold
the
that
and
thought, Carolyn. We have to
Mhm.
take a very short break, but that's a key point. This is about negating the Jewish state, not
Mhm.
simply
Right.
causing the acts of violence. We'll be right back with more with the great Caroline Glick right after this.